Part 1. The human shared her lunch. The transport shuttle touched down on the landing platform with a soft hiss. Ji-woo pressed her face against the small window, staring at the massive research station floating in space. Theta 7 looked like a giant wheel spinning slowly against the backdrop of stars. Below the station, a green and blue planet rotated peacefully. That was Vora Prime, her new home for the next 2 years. She grabbed her bag and stepped out into the docking bay. The air smelled strange, like metal and something sweet she could not name. A tall man with kind eyes waited near the entrance. He wore the standard research uniform, a gray jumpsuit with colored badges on the sleeve. "You must be Ji-woo," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Tae-young. Welcome to Theta 7. How was your journey?" Long," Ji-woo replied, shaking his hand. 3 weeks in cryosleep feels like no time at all, but also forever." Tae-young laughed. "I know the feeling. Come on. Let me show you around before we head to the briefing." They walked through corridors that curved gently upward. Ji-woo had read about the station's design, but seeing it in person felt different. Through windows along the walls, she could see other sections of the wheel across the empty space in the center. Small transport pods zipped back and forth like insects. "The station houses about 200 researchers," Tae-young explained as they walked. "Humans like us, but also Klixen, Nethril, Vex, and Dravik. You'll meet them all soon enough. The Klixen look like big insects. Don't stare. They find it rude." Ji-woo nodded, trying to remember everything from her training. She had studied alien species for years at university, but this would be her first time actually working alongside them. They passed through a common area where several beings sat around tables. Ji-woo spotted her first Klixen, a creature with 6 legs and a body covered in dark blue chitin. Its multifaceted eyes seemed to look in all directions at once. At another table, something that looked like floating colored smoke drifted above a chair. "That must be a Nethril." "Here we are," Tae-young said, stopping at a door marked Xenobiology Department. Inside, a dozen screens covered the walls, each showing different views of creatures moving through various habitats. Ji-woo's breath caught. The creatures were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. They looked somewhat like the big cats from Earth, but larger, with 6 legs instead of 4, and fur that seemed to shimmer with colors that shifted in the light. "Vorathians," Tae-young said softly. "Magnificent, aren't they?" A woman stood from her desk and approached them. She had short black hair and wore thick glasses that made her eyes look larger. "This is Soo-bin," Tae-young introduced. "She's our behavioral specialist." "Welcome, Ji-woo," Soo-bin said warmly. "I've read your papers on pack dynamics. Very impressive work." Thank you," Ji-woo replied, feeling her cheeks warm. "I'm excited to finally see Vorathians in person." Soo-bin's smile faded slightly. "They're incredible creatures, but we've had trouble studying them up close. The adults are far too dangerous to approach. Even with barriers and protective gear, they've damaged 3 observation posts. We lost a drone just last week." "What about the young ones?" Ji-woo asked, remembering her briefing materials. "The cubs are our best hope," Tae-young said, gesturing to one of the screens. "They're still dangerous, but manageable with proper precautions. The problem is, they're aggressive toward any species that approaches them. We've tried everything. Used every protocol in the book. Nothing works." Ji-woo stepped closer to the screen. On it, she could see a group of young Vorathians in a large habitat filled with rocks and strange purple plants. The cubs were about the size of large earth dogs, playing and wrestling with each other. Their movements were quick and powerful, full of energy. "They don't look aggressive right now," Ji-woo observed. "Wait," Soo-bin said, tapping a control. The view changed to recorded footage. A mechanical arm extended into the habitat, carrying food. Immediately, the cubs stopped playing. They moved together, forming a protective circle, their lips pulled back to show sharp teeth. One of them lunged at the mechanical arm, nearly tearing it from its mounting. "See," Subin said. "They view everything as a threat." Ji-woo watched the footage replay several times. Something bothered her about it, but she could not quite figure out what. "I'd like to observe them in person," she said finally. "Just watching. Nothing more." "Can that be arranged?" Taeyang and Subin exchanged glances. "Sure," Taeyang said, "but you'll need to stay behind the barriers. Station Director Casthal is very strict about safety protocols." The next morning, Ji-woo stood in an observation room overlooking one of the habitats. The barrier was made of transparent material stronger than steel. Through it, she could see the cubs clearly. There were 12 of them in this group, all different sizes and color patterns. She watched them for hours, taking notes on her tablet. They played roughly, biting and clawing at each other, but never seemed to truly hurt one another. When feeding time came, she noticed something interesting. The 3 largest cubs ate first, while the others waited. There was an order to it, a social structure. "They're not just attacking the feeding arm because they're aggressive," she muttered to herself. "They're protecting each other during a vulnerable time." Ji-woo continued observing for 3 more days, learning their patterns and behaviors. She started to recognize individuals. The largest cub had a scar over one eye. The smallest one had darker fur around its paws. They had personalities, preferences, little quirks that made each one unique. On her 4th day at the station, Ji-woo decided to take her lunch break in the garden zone. It was a small area filled with earth plants, maintained to help the human researchers feel less homesick. She found a quiet bench, opened her container, and began eating the rice and grilled meat she had prepared that morning. The food reminded her of home, of her mother's kitchen. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, thinking about the Vorathian cubs and trying to puzzle out how to approach them differently. Then the alarm started blaring. Red lights flashed throughout the garden. A mechanical voice announced, "Containment breach in Habitat 7. All personnel evacuate immediately." Containment breach in Habitat 7. Ji-woo stood up, her heart pounding. Habitat 7 was one of the cub enclosures. She looked around, trying to find the fastest exit route. That was when she saw them. 3 Vorathian cubs pushed through a damaged ventilation grate at the far end of the garden. They tumbled out, looked around, and spotted her immediately. Ji-woo froze. Her training told her to run, to find safety, to call for help. But something deeper, some instinct she trusted, told her to stay still. The cubs approached slowly, their heads low, ears forward. They were not in attack position. They looked curious. Through her earpiece, Taeyang's voice crackled urgently. "Ji-woo! Can you hear me? Get out of there now. We're tracking 3 cubs in your location." The cubs came closer. The largest one, the one with the scar over its eye, stopped about 3 meters away. Its nostrils flared, sniffing the air. It was smelling her food. Ji-woo made a decision that would change everything. She slowly reached down to her lunch container, picked up a piece of the grilled meat, and gently tossed it toward the scarred cub. The meat landed on the grass between them. The cub's eyes followed it, then looked back at Ji-woo. It stepped forward cautiously, sniffed the meat, and ate it in one quick bite. The other 2 cubs moved closer. Ji-woo took more meat from her container and tossed pieces to each of them. They ate hungrily, but did not rush toward her. She kept some food for herself and sat back down on the bench, continuing to eat her own meal as if nothing unusual was happening. The 3 cubs, after finishing their portions, did not leave. They sat down in the grass, watching her with intense, golden eyes. Ji-woo ate her rice slowly, calmly, keeping her movements small and non-threatening. "Ji-woo, what are you doing?" Taeyang's voice sounded panicked in her ear. "The security team is suiting up, but you need to get to safety." "I'm fine," Jiwoo said quietly. They're not attacking. They're just curious. She finished the last of her rice and stood up slowly. The cubs watched, but did not move. Jiwoo walked carefully toward the garden's main exit, not turning her back on them, but not running either. When she reached the door, she looked back. The 3 cubs still sat where they had been, watching her leave. The door closed between them with a soft click. Jiwoo let out a long breath she had not realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking, but she was smiling. Behind the observation cameras, every researcher on the station had watched the entire encounter. What they had just witnessed was impossible according to every study ever done on Vorathians. No alien species had ever made peaceful contact with the cubs. But a human had just shared her lunch with them, and the cubs had simply watched her eat in peace. Part 2. The Unexpected Bond. The conference room was crowded with researchers from every species on the station. Jiwoo sat at the center of a long table, feeling dozens of eyes watching her. Some were human eyes. Others were multifaceted insect eyes. One pair glowed softly in a cloud of purple gas. All of them looked at her with the same expression: disbelief. Station Director Kasthal stood at the head of the table. The Dravik was tall and covered in dark green scales that caught the light when he moved. His yellow eyes fixed on Jiwoo with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Researcher Jiwoo," Kasthal said, his voice a deep rumble. "You violated 3 safety protocols and 2 research guidelines. You understand this, yes?" "Yes, Director," Jiwoo replied quietly. "You put yourself in danger. You compromised the integrity of the research. You could have been killed." Kasthal's tail swished behind him, a sign of agitation. "Explain why I should not send you back to Earth on the next transport." Jiwoo took a deep breath. "Because I made contact with the cubs. Peaceful contact. Something no one else has managed to do." A Klixan researcher named Vixthar clicked his mandibles together. "Luck," he said, his voice sounding like wind through metal chimes. "Simple luck. The cubs were confused by the new environment. That is all. It wasn't luck." Subin spoke up from across the table. She had been reviewing the footage all night. "I've watched the recording 50 times. The cubs' body language was not confused. They were curious and calm. When Jiwoo offered food, they accepted it as a social gesture." "Impossible," another researcher said. "Vorathians don't have social food-sharing behaviors. Adult Vorathians don't," Jiwoo said. "But cubs might. We've never been able to observe them closely enough to know. In pack species on Earth, young animals often learn social bonding through food sharing. What if Vorathian cubs are the same?" Taeyang pulled up a holographic display showing the footage. Everyone watched as the scarred cub approached Jiwoo, accepted the meat, and then sat peacefully while she ate. The silence in the room was thick. A being made of swirling colored gas floated closer to the display. Wispel, the Nethril observer, spoke in a voice like soft music. "The human did not run. The cubs did not attack. This is data. Strange data, but data nonetheless. Should we not investigate further?" Kasthal's scales rippled. "Investigate how? Send Jiwoo back into danger?" "With proper precautions," Subin said quickly. "Controlled environment. Full monitoring. Safety team on standby. If Jiwoo can establish consistent, peaceful contact, we could learn more about Vorathian social development than we have in 5 years of standard observation." The debate continued for another hour. Finally, Kasthal raised one clawed hand for silence. 3 sessions, he said firmly. Controlled conditions. Full safety protocols. At the first sign of aggression, we terminate the experiment. Agreed? Jiwoo nodded. Agreed. 2 days later, Jiwoo stood outside Habitat 7. The damage from the cubs' escape had been repaired, and the 3 cubs were back inside. Through the observation window, she could see them playing, tumbling over each other in the artificial sunlight. She carried a simple meal in a container, rice, grilled meat, and some seasoned vegetables. The same thing she had been eating in the garden. Subin had suggested keeping everything as similar as possible to the original encounter. Taeyang stood in the control room above, monitoring every sensor. Vixthar was with him, along with Wispel and a security team in protective armor. If anything went wrong, they could flood the habitat with sleeping gas in seconds. "Ready when you are," Taeyang's voice said through her earpiece. Ji-woo stepped through the airlock into the habitat. The door sealed behind her with a hiss. The three cubs immediately stopped playing and turned to look at her. The scarred one tilted its head, and Ji-woo felt certain it recognized her. She walked slowly to the center of the habitat and sat down on the grass. She opened her food container and set it beside her. The smell of grilled meat drifted through the air. The three cubs approached, moving with the same cautious curiosity they had shown in the garden. The scarred one came closest, sitting about 2 meters away. The other two flanked it, forming a small semicircle. Ji-woo picked up a piece of meat and held it out. The scarred cub stood, walked forward, and gently took the meat from her fingers. Its teeth were careful, not even touching her skin. It stepped back and ate, while Ji-woo offered food to the other two. When all three had been fed, Ji-woo took some rice for herself and began eating. The cubs watched her, their golden eyes tracking every movement of her hands. She ate slowly, making sure to chew carefully, to show them the act of eating in peace. Time passed quietly. Ji-woo finished about half her meal, then offered the cubs more portions. They accepted eagerly, but still without aggression. When she finally stood to leave, the cubs did not try to stop her. They simply watched as she walked to the exit. Session 1 successful, Taeyang announced over the intercom. Incredible work, Ji-woo. The second session happened 3 days later. Ji-woo entered the habitat with her lunch, expecting to see the same 3 cubs. Instead, 5 were waiting for her. 2 new ones had joined the group, both slightly smaller than the original 3. She sat in the same spot and opened her container. The scarred cub approached first, and she gave it food. But when the second original cub came forward, one of the newcomers rushed ahead, trying to take the food first. The scarred cub moved fast. It blocked the pushy newcomer, making a low growling sound. The newcomer backed away immediately, ears flat against its head. Only then did the scarred cub allow the other original to receive food. Ji-woo watched this interaction with growing excitement. The cubs were enforcing social rules. The scarred one was establishing order, teaching the newcomers how to behave. She made sure to feed all 5, keeping the portions even, and the pushy cub waited its turn without complaining. As she ate her own meal, she noticed the cubs settling down around her. They did not form a random group. The 3 originals positioned themselves closest to her, while the 2 newcomers stayed slightly farther back. It was a pattern, a structure. "They're forming a hierarchy," Ji-woo said softly into her communicator. "The original 3 are dominant. They're accepting the newcomers, but establishing rules first." Subin's voice crackled back, filled with excitement. "This is exactly what we needed to see. Pack behavior. Social learning. Keep doing what you're doing." The third session was scheduled for a week later. Ji-woo had asked for more time between sessions, wanting to see if the cubs would remember her after several days. She also asked the kitchen to prepare more food. She had a feeling she would need it. When she entered the habitat, her feeling proved correct. All 12 cubs were there, waiting in a group near the center. News had spread, somehow, through whatever methods Vorathians used to communicate. Ji-woo sat down and immediately noticed a problem. She did not have enough food for full portions for 12 cubs. She would have to give each one a smaller amount. She started with the scarred cub, offering a portion about half the usual size. The cub took it without complaint. She fed the other 2 originals next, then the newcomers from session 2, then the rest. Each cub received an equal small portion. None of them fought. None of them tried to take more. When all 12 had been fed, Ji-woo began eating her own meal. That was when something remarkable happened. The three original cubs moved. They stood and repositioned themselves around Ji-woo, forming a triangle with her at the center. They faced outward, toward the other 9 cubs, creating a protective barrier. The other cubs did not challenge this arrangement. They settled down in a wider circle, watching peacefully. The 3 originals remained alert, guardians at their posts. Ji-woo felt a shiver run down her spine. She understood what she was seeing. The cubs were not just tolerating her presence, they had accepted her into their social structure. They were protecting her feeding time the same way they would protect each other. She ate slowly, savoring not just the food, but the incredible moment she was experiencing. Around her, 12 apex predators from an alien world sat peacefully, maintaining order, showing her a trust that no other species had earned. When she finished and stood, the cubs parted smoothly. The 3 originals escorted her to the exit, walking alongside her like an honor guard. At the door, she turned and looked at the scarred cub. "Thank you," she said quietly. The cub tilted its head, and for just a moment, Ji-woo felt certain it understood. Back in the observation room, the research team sat in stunned silence. Tae-young was the first to speak. "She's part of the pack now," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "They've adopted her." Vixthar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of deep thought in Clixon. This should not be possible. The biological differences alone should prevent such bonding. But it happened, Wispel said, the Nethral's colors swirling with excitement. "We all witnessed it. The question now is, why humans? Why can they do this when we cannot?" Subin pulled up comparative data on her screen. Humans evolved alongside pack predators on Earth. For thousands of years, they lived near wolves, eventually domesticating them. It's built into human behavior, this ability to read and integrate with pack dynamics. "So it's not just Ji-woo," Tae-young said. "Other humans might be able to do this too?" "Maybe," Subin replied. "Or maybe it's a combination of human instinct and Ji-woo's specific knowledge and temperament. Either way, we've made the most significant breakthrough in Vorathian research since the station was built." In her quarters that night, Ji-woo wrote in her personal log. Her hands still trembled slightly from the adrenaline of the session. "Today, 12 cubs trusted me with their safety," she wrote. "They let me into their world, into their pack. I came here to study them, but I think they're teaching me something far more important. Trust isn't about species or biology. It's about showing up, sharing what you have, and treating others with respect. Even across the vastness of space, even between a human and an alien predator, some things remain universal." She saved the log and looked out her window at Vora Prime rotating below. Somewhere on that planet, adult Vorathians hunted in the wild, never knowing that their young were forming bonds with creatures from another world. Ji-woo smiled. The universe was bigger and stranger than anyone had imagined. And sometimes, all it took to bridge the impossible distance between species was the simple act of sharing lunch. Part 3. The Failed Copy. News of Ji-woo's success spread through Theta 7 like fire through dry grass. Within a week, researchers from every department wanted to observe her sessions with the cubs. The small observation room above Habitat 7 became crowded with scientists taking notes, recording data, and theorizing about the implications. Ji-woo continued her visits, bringing lunch 3 times a week. Each time, the same pattern repeated. The 12 cubs would gather. The 3 originals, which she had privately named Guardian, Shadow, and Bright for their distinctive markings, would form their protective triangle around her. She would share her food, and they would all eat in peaceful silence. The bond grew stronger with each visit. Guardian, the scarred one, began greeting her at the entrance when she arrived. Shadow, the darkest of the 3, started bringing her small objects. Smooth stones, interesting plants, even once a brightly colored feather from one of Vora Prime's flying creatures. Bright, the smallest of the 3 leaders, would press against her leg gently before taking food, a gesture Ji-woo recognized as affection. Subin documented everything with growing excitement. She said one evening in the lab. Cross-species pack bonding, adoption behaviors, gift-giving. We're watching something that will rewrite our understanding of social intelligence. Taeyang agreed. But he looked worried. The station director has been getting pressure from above. The Galactic Research Consortium wants results they can replicate. One human succeeding isn't enough for them. They want protocols, procedures, methods that other researchers can follow. Ji-woo felt a knot form in her stomach. It's not about protocols. It's about relationship. Trust. You can't write a manual for that. And, I know, Taeyang said quietly, but try telling that to Kasthal. The next morning, Ji-woo was summoned to the director's office. Kasthal sat behind a desk made of dark metal, his yellow eyes sharp and evaluating. Two other beings were in the room. Vixthar and another Dravik researcher named Silmoth, whom Ji-woo had seen around the station but never worked with directly. Researcher Ji-woo, Kasthal began, your work has been impressive. However, science requires reproducibility. We need to determine if your methods can be taught to others. My methods are simple, Ji-woo said carefully. Patience, respect, and food sharing. But it takes time to build trust. Time we do not have in abundance, Kasthal replied. Researcher Silmoth has volunteered to attempt contact with a different cub group using your approach. You will brief him on your procedures. Ji-woo looked at Silmoth. The Dravik researcher was larger than Kasthal, with darker scales and scars that suggested a military background. He met her gaze with confidence that bordered on arrogance. With respect, Director, Ji-woo said slowly, I don't think this is a good idea. The cubs in Habitat 7 have spent weeks learning to trust me. A different group won't have that foundation. And Silmoth. She hesitated. Yes, Kasthal prompted. Dravik are predators. Your natural body language, your pheromones, your movements. They're all designed for hunting. The cubs might react differently to that. Silmoth's scales rippled. A Dravik expression of annoyance. I am a trained researcher with 15 years of experience. I can control my body language. Ji-woo wanted to argue more, but she could see the decision had already been made. She spent the next hour explaining her approach to Silmoth, how she moved, how she offered food, how she stayed calm even when the cubs came close. He listened but kept interrupting with suggestions for improvement, ways to make the process faster, more efficient. You're missing the point, Ji-woo said finally. This isn't about efficiency. It's about showing them you're not a threat. I understand perfectly, Silmoth said dismissively. Sit still. Offer food. Wait. Simple enough. 3 days later, the attempt was scheduled. Ji-woo stood in the observation room with what felt like half the station's population. Everyone wanted to see if a Dravik could replicate her success. Taeyang stood beside her, his expression tense. This feels wrong. He muttered. It is wrong, Ji-woo replied. But no one's listening to me. Below, Silmoth entered Habitat 4, which housed a different group of cubs. These were younger than the ones Ji-woo worked with. Only 8 in the group. Silmoth carried a container of prepared meat, cut into portions based on Ji-woo's specifications. The cubs noticed him immediately. They stopped their playing and turned to watch. Their posture was different from how Ji-woo's cubs reacted to her. These cubs' ears were flat, their bodies low to the ground. Warning signs. Silmoth walked to the center of the habitat and sat. Even from the observation room, Ji-woo could see the problem. His movements were too sharp, too controlled. Predator movements. He was trying to appear calm, but ended up looking coiled, ready to strike. The cubs did not approach. They spread out, forming a wide circle around him, keeping their distance. Silmoth opened his container and took out a piece of meat. He tossed it toward the nearest cub. The meat landed in front of the young Vorathian. But instead of approaching to eat it, the cub backed away. They're afraid, Subin said softly from her position at the monitors. His body language is all wrong. Silmoth tried again, tossing meat to each cub in turn. A few of them sniffed at the offerings, but none ate. They were too focused on watching him, trying to determine if he was a threat. Growing frustrated, Silmoth stood up. That was his first major mistake. The sudden movement triggered a response in the cubs. 3 of them dropped into aggressive crouches, lips pulling back from their teeth. Silmoth, sit back down. Kosthal's voice commanded through the intercom. Slow movements only. But Silmoth was already moving toward one of the cubs, extending his hand with more food. He was trying to hand-feed them the way Ji Woo did with Guardian. His second mistake. The cub he approached interpreted the advance as aggression. It hissed, a sound like steam escaping from high pressure. The other cubs tensed, ready to defend their packmate. Abort, Kasthal ordered. Silmoth, exit the habitat now. Silmoth turned to leave, but the movement was too fast, too much like prey fleeing. The young Vorathian's hunting instincts activated. 2 of them lunged forward, not quite attacking but testing, seeing if he would run. Silmoth's own predator instincts responded. He spun to face them, raising his arms in a threat display. His third and worst mistake. The cubs saw the challenge and accepted it. 4 of them rushed forward at once. Silmoth backed toward the exit. Moving faster now. 1 cub got close enough to snap at his leg, teeth catching the edge of his uniform and tearing the fabric. Alarms blared throughout the habitat. Sleeping gas began flooding the space from vents in the ceiling. The cubs, sensing danger, broke off their attack and scattered. Silmoth reached the exit and stumbled through, the door sealing behind him just as one of the cubs hit it with enough force to make the transparent barrier shake. The observation room erupted in chaos. Researchers shouted in multiple languages. Kasthal was already on his communicator, calling for medical teams and damage assessment. Ji Woo just stood there, her arms wrapped around herself, feeling sick. Taeyang put a hand on her shoulder. It's not your fault. I told them it wouldn't work, she said quietly. Silmoth was treated for minor scratches and bruising. Nothing serious. But his pride was deeply wounded. Within an hour, Kasthal called another emergency meeting. This time, there was no pretense of politeness. The experiment was a failure, the director stated flatly. Researcher Silmoth followed the described procedures but could not achieve peaceful contact. The cubs responded with aggression. This raises serious questions about the viability of Ji Woo's approach. It raises questions about trying to force something that needs to develop naturally. Ji Woo countered. She was tired of being diplomatic. I warned you that Dravik body language would read as threatening. I told you that different cub groups would react differently. No one listened. Vixthar clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Perhaps the issue is not the method, but the species attempting it. Researcher Ji Woo succeeded where Silmoth failed. The primary variable is their species difference. Exactly my point, Ji Woo said, standing up. She moved to the display screen and pulled up comparative videos. On one side, her first contact with Guardian and the other cubs. On the other, Silmoth's attempted contact. Watch the body language, she said. When I sit, I'm relaxed. My shoulders are soft. My hands are open. I'm non-threatening. When Silmoth sits, even trying to be calm, his body is tense, his scales are slightly raised, an automatic response he probably doesn't even notice. His movements are controlled, which to a prey animal looks like a predator ready to pounce. She switched to another set of images. On Earth, humans domesticated wolves thousands of years ago. We turned apex predators into companions because we understood pack behavior. We could read their signals and send the right ones back. It's built into our evolutionary history. So you're saying only humans can do this? Kasthal asked. I'm saying humans have a specific advantage in this situation. Maybe other species could develop relationships with the cubs eventually, but it would require different approaches based on their natural behaviors. You can't just copy what I do and expect the same results. Wispel drifted forward, colors shifting to contemplative blues and purples. The human makes a valid point. We approach this as a technical problem with a replicable solution. But social bonding is not technical. It is emotional, instinctual. Then what do you suggest? Casthal asked, his tone sharp with frustration. We abandon the research? Send you home and classify this as an anomaly? No, Jiwoo said firmly. I suggest you let me continue my work without trying to rush or force it. I'm learning things about Vorathian social development that have never been documented. Real science takes time. The room fell silent. Finally, Subin spoke up. I've been analyzing all the data from Jiwoo's sessions. The cubs aren't just tolerating her, they're teaching each other about her. The newcomers learn from the original three how to behave around her. It's cultural transmission of knowledge. If we interfere or try to shortcut the process, we risk destroying what we're trying to study. Taeyang nodded. And if we're patient, if we let this develop naturally, we might discover things about intelligence and social learning that apply across species. Isn't that worth protecting? Casthal was quiet for a long moment, his tail swishing behind him. Finally, he spoke. Very well. Jiwoo, you will continue your research without interference. No more attempts to replicate your methods with other species or other cub groups. This is now a long-term observational study of human-Vorathian interaction. Thank you, Director, Jiwoo said, relief flooding through her. However, Casthal continued, his yellow eyes fixing on her. You will document everything in detail. If something happens to you, we need to know what you've learned. That night, Jiwoo visited Habitat 7 for an unscheduled session. She just sat outside the barrier, watching the cubs sleep in a pile of warm bodies. Guardian lifted its head, spotted her, and made a soft, chirping sound before settling back down. I'm sorry, Jiwoo whispered. I'm sorry people wanted to use what we have as a tool, as something to copy and exploit. Through the barrier, Guardian's ear twitched, as if somehow hearing her apology. Jiwoo made a promise to herself then. Whatever trust these cubs had given her, she would protect it. She would let it grow at its own pace, in its own way. Because some things in the universe were too precious to rush. Part 4. The Protective Ring. 2 months passed since Silmoth's failed attempt. Jiwoo fell into a comfortable routine with the cubs. 3 times a week, she entered Habitat 7 with her lunch. 3 times a week, Guardian, Shadow, and Bright formed their protective triangle around her, while she shared food and ate in peace. The other 9 cubs had learned the pattern perfectly, waiting their turn, maintaining order. But the cubs were growing. Guardian now stood as tall as Jiwoo's waist. Shadow had developed powerful muscles across his shoulders. Bright, though still the smallest of the 3 leaders, moved with a grace and speed that was breathtaking to watch. They were no longer cute youngsters. They were becoming apex predators. Subin monitored their development with a mixture of excitement and concern. In another 4 months, they'll be nearly adult-sized, she told Jiwoo one evening in the lab. We don't know how their behavior might change. Pack dynamics often shift dramatically during maturation. They won't hurt me, Jiwoo said with confidence she genuinely felt. I believe that, Subin replied. But Casthal is getting nervous. He's been in contact with the Galactic Research Consortium. They're impressed with your data, but they want more. They want to test the bond. Jiwoo looked up sharply from her notes. Test it? How? They want to introduce a controlled stress situation. See how the cubs react when you're perceived to be in danger. Absolutely not, Jiwoo said immediately. That's manipulative and potentially dangerous. What if it damages their trust? Taeyang entered the lab, carrying a tablet. His expression was serious. It's not a request, Jiwoo. The consortium has authorized the test. Director Casthal wants to conduct it in 3 days. Ji-woo felt anger rise in her chest. This is wrong. We're not studying pack behavior anymore. We're treating them like trained animals. Like circus performers. I know, Taeyang said quietly. I argued against it. Su-bin did too. But they overruled us. The test will be simple. You'll enter the habitat as normal. While you're there, they'll trigger an alarm. Just sound, no actual danger. They want to observe if the cub's protective behavior extends beyond feeding time. And if they panic, if the alarm scares them and they attack, there will be safety measures, Su-bin said, but her voice lacked conviction. Sleeping gas. On standby. Rapid extraction protocols. But Ji-woo, if we refuse, they'll likely terminate the entire project. Send the cubs to a core world facility and send you home. Ji-woo sat down heavily. She thought about Guardian's greeting chirp, about Shadow's gifts, about the way Bright pressed against her leg, in affection. She thought about betraying that trust with a manufactured crisis. I need to think about it, she said finally. That night, Ji-woo could not sleep. She stood at her window, watching Vora Prime rotate slowly below the station. Somewhere on that planet, adult Vorathians lived free, hunting and running without observation or testing. Their cubs should have been there too, learning to survive in the wild, not trapped in a habitat being subjected to experiments. But the cubs were here, and refusing the test would not free them. It would just take them away from the one being in the universe they had learned to trust. The next morning, Ji-woo agreed to the test. The 3 days until the scheduled event felt both too long and too short. Ji-woo visited the cubs during that time, and she swore they could sense something was wrong. Guardian watched her more carefully than usual. Shadow brought her 3 gifts in one session instead of his normal one. Bright stayed pressed against her side even after eating, reluctant to move away. On the morning of the test, the observation room was packed. Casthal was there, along with representatives from the consortium appearing via holographic link, Vixthar, Wispel, and at least 20 other researchers crowded the space. Taeyang and Su-bin stood closest to the glass, both looking unhappy. Ji-woo entered the habitat with her lunch container. The 12 cubs were waiting, and they seemed agitated. Perhaps they could sense the extra attention from all the observers. Perhaps they picked up on Ji-woo's own nervousness. Guardian approached and made the greeting chirp, but his ears were slightly back. Shadow circled around behind her, positioning himself between Ji-woo and the observation window. Bright pressed close, a whining sound coming from her throat. They know something's wrong, Su-bin said softly in the observation room. Proceed with the test, Casthal ordered. Ji-woo sat in her usual spot and opened her food container. She tried to act normal, to move the way she always moved, but her hands were shaking slightly. Guardian noticed. He tilted his head, studying her face with those intelligent golden eyes. She fed the 3 leaders first, then the other 9 cubs. Everyone ate, but the atmosphere was different. Tense. The cubs kept looking around, sniffing the air, sensing invisible wrongness. Ji-woo began eating her own meal. Guardian, Shadow, and Bright took their protective positions around her, but they were more alert than usual. The other 9 cubs did not settle down in their normal relaxed circle. They stayed on their feet, watchful. Trigger the alarm, Casthal commanded. A loud siren erupted throughout the habitat. Red lights began flashing from the ceiling panels. It was the same alarm used for genuine emergencies. Impossibly loud, designed to penetrate even the chaos of a crisis. The effect on the cubs was immediate and dramatic. The 9 outer cubs scattered, running for the corners of the habitat, seeking shelter from the perceived threat. Their training from the researchers who raised them kicked in. When alarms sound, find safe spaces. But Guardian, Shadow, and Bright did not run. They moved closer to Ji-woo. Guardian dropped into a protective crouch directly in front of her. his body blocking her from the direction of the observation window. Shadow pressed against her left side, so close she could feel the heat of his body through her uniform. Bright positioned herself on Jiwoo's right, a low growl rumbling in her chest. Then, as if responding to some unspoken signal, the three leaders began to move. They did not move away from Jiwoo. They moved around her, circling, their bodies creating a living wall. "They're forming a defensive ring," Taeyang breathed, his eyes wide. The 9 scattered cubs, seeing their leader's behavior, stopped running. One by one, they returned, approaching the protective formation. They did not try to reach Jiwoo. Instead, they formed a second ring around the first, facing outward, creating layers of protection. Jiwoo sat in the center of it all, her lunch forgotten, her heart pounding. 12 Vorathian cubs, each one capable of killing her with a single strike, had surrounded her. But they faced away from her, facing the world, ready to defend her against whatever threat the alarm represented. The alarm continued to blare. The cubs did not break formation. Guardian's muscles were tensed, ready to spring at any attacker. Shadow's tail lashed back and forth, a sign of high alert. Bright's ears were flat against her head, but she did not move from her position at Jiwoo's side. In the observation room, silence had fallen. Every researcher stared at the scene below in stunned amazement. The holographic representatives from the consortium leaned forward in their projected forms, trying to get a better view. "Turn off the alarm," Jiwoo said into her communicator, her voice surprisingly steady. "They've proven the point. Turn it off now." "Not yet," Casthal said. "We need to see how long they maintain the formation." "Turn it off," Jiwoo shouted. "You're scaring them. You're making them think I'm in danger. This isn't research anymore. It's cruelty." Subin moved toward the control panel, but Casthal blocked her. "The test parameters specified 5 minutes of alarm. We're only at 2. "I don't care about your parameters," Jiwoo said fiercely. She stood up slowly, carefully. The cubs immediately adjusted their formation, maintaining their protective ring around her even as she moved. "These cubs trust me. They're protecting me. Because they consider me part of their pack, and you're exploiting that trust to collect data. End the test now, or I walk out and never come back." Casthal's scales rippled with anger. But he nodded to a technician. The alarm cut off abruptly. The red lights stopped flashing. In the sudden silence, the cubs remained in their defensive formation for several more seconds. Then Guardian looked back at Jiwoo, as if checking to make sure she was safe. She reached out and gently placed her hand on his head, scratching behind his ears the way she had learned he liked. "It's okay," she said softly. "You kept me safe. All of you did." Guardian made a soft chirping sound. Slowly, the defensive formation broke apart. The 9 outer cubs began to relax, returning to their normal behaviors. Shadow brought Jiwoo a smooth stone, a gift to comfort her. Bright pressed against her leg, seeking and offering reassurance. Jiwoo picked up her lunch container and sat back down. Her hands were still shaking, but not from fear. From anger and sadness and a fierce protective love for these incredible creatures who had chosen to defend her. She finished her meal while the cubs settled around her, their presence warm and comforting. When she finally stood to leave, Guardian escorted her to the door as always. But this time, he did something new. He touched his nose to her hand, a gentle gesture that felt like a promise. Back in the observation room, Casthal faced the holographic representatives. "You have your data," he said shortly. "The cubs display protective behavior toward the human. The bond is real and extends beyond feeding contexts. Are you satisfied?" Fiver 1. Online. 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 One of the representatives, a Vex whose crystalline body chimed softly when she moved, spoke. "Most satisfied. This changes our understanding of Vorathian social capacity. However, we have concerns about the depth of bonding. The cubs refuse to abandon their protective positions, even under stress. This suggests an attachment that might interfere with eventual release to wild populations. Then don't release them to the wild, Jiwoo said, entering the room. She had left the habitat and come straight up, her anger still burning hot. You brought them here. You raised them in captivity. You subjected them to tests and observations. And now they've formed a bond that you're calling a problem? They deserve better than to be treated as experimental subjects who can be discarded when they're no longer convenient. Jiwoo, Taeyang said quietly, a warning in his voice. But Jiwoo was beyond caring about protocol. I've documented every session. I've provided you with data on social development, pack behavior, and cross-species bonding that would take decades to gather in normal observation. These cubs have given me their trust, and they've taught me that intelligence and emotion exist in forms we barely understand. If you think the solution is to separate us because the bond is too strong, then you've missed the entire point of what we've learned here. The Vex representative tilted her crystalline head. What would you suggest? Researcher Jiwoo. Let me continue working with them. Document how the bond develops as they mature. Study how their pack dynamics evolve with a human as part of their social structure. This is unprecedented data, but only if you allow it to develop naturally, instead of trying to control or end it prematurely. Wispel drifted forward, colors shifting to warm golds. The human speaks wisdom. We observe a unique phenomenon. To interrupt it now would be like stopping an experiment at its most interesting phase. Vixthar clicked his mandibles in agreement. The cubs have made their choice. They have claimed this human as pack. To separate them would cause psychological harm to subjects we claim to care about. The representatives conferred among themselves in whispered conversations that the audio system did not transmit. Finally, the Vex spoke again. We will allow the research to continue under current conditions. However, researcher Jiwoo, you must understand the responsibility you have undertaken. These cubs are bonding to you at a critical developmental stage. That bond will likely last their entire lives. You are becoming, in essence, a permanent part of their pack structure. I understand, Jiwoo said quietly, and I accept that responsibility. That night, Jiwoo returned to Habitat 7 outside of any scheduled session. She just sat outside the barrier, watching the cubs sleep. Guardian, even in sleep, had positioned himself between the rest of the pack and the observation window, protecting them even in dreams. Subin found her there an hour later. She sat down beside Jiwoo without speaking for a long moment. You know they'll grow to full size eventually, Subin said finally. Adult Vorathians are 3 times larger than the cubs are now. Stronger. More dangerous. They won't hurt me, Jiwoo replied. How can you be so sure? Jiwoo thought about the protective ring, about 12 cubs choosing to defend her instead of fleeing to safety. She thought about Guardian's nose touching her hand, about Shadow's gifts, about Bright's constant affection. Because I know what it means to be part of a pack, she said. And packs protect their own. Part 5. The Choice. 4 months later, the cubs were no longer cubs. Guardian stood taller than Jiwoo now, his scarred face level with hers when he greeted her at the habitat entrance. Shadow's shoulders rippled with muscle, each movement displaying the power of a fully mature predator. Bright, though still the smallest of the 3 leaders, moved with lethal grace, every step silent and controlled. The 9 others had matured too, becoming formidable creatures in their own right. The habitat that once seemed spacious now felt crowded with 12 near-adult Vorathians. Station engineers had expanded it twice. But Casthal warned that further expansion was impossible. The station simply did not have the resources. Jiwoo continued her visits, though she no longer brought just lunch. Now she brought full meals, carefully prepared by the station kitchen, to meet the nutritional needs of growing Vorathians. The cubs, now young adults, still formed their protective ring when she ate. The ritual had become as natural to them as breathing. She had also started bringing other items, puzzle toys to keep their minds engaged, new scents for environmental enrichment, sometimes just interesting objects from around the station. The Vorathians investigated everything with intense curiosity, and Shadow had started a collection of gifts he particularly liked, keeping them in a corner of the habitat he had claimed as his own space. On a Tuesday morning, Taeyang found Ji-woo in the observation room, watching the Vorathians play. Their play was rougher now, more violent to an untrained eye. But she could read the signals that showed they were still bonding, still reinforcing their pack relationships through controlled combat. "We need to talk," Taeyang said, his expression serious. Ji-woo felt her stomach tighten. Those words never preceded good news. They went to his office, where Subin was already waiting. Both of them looked uncomfortable, and Ji-woo's sense of dread deepened. "The Galactic Research Consortium has made a decision about the Vorathians," Taeyang began. "They want to transfer them to a core world facility, a place called the Xenobiological Preserve on Meridian Prime. It's much larger, with better resources, more researchers, advanced study equipment." "No," Ji-woo said immediately. "These Vorathians were born here. This is their home." End quote. "These Vorathians were born here. These Vorathians. This is their home. The habitat is too small for them now," Subin said gently. "They need more space, and Meridian Prime can provide that. It's not a bad decision from a welfare perspective." "What about the bond?" Ji-woo asked. "What happens to that when you ship them halfway across the galaxy?" Taeyang and Subin exchanged glances. Finally, Taeyang spoke. "The consortium believes the bond is the problem. The Vorathians are too dependent on you. It's interfering with their ability to develop natural pack behaviors. At Meridian Prime, they could be gradually socialized with other Vorathians, prepared for eventual release into wild populations." "That's nonsense," Ji-woo said, her voice rising. "They have developed natural pack behaviors, the protective ring, the hierarchy, the gift-giving. All of it is natural. The only difference is that I'm part of the pack, instead of another Vorathian." "I know," Taeyang said. "I argued that exact point. So did Subin. We were overruled. The transport is scheduled in 3 days." Ji-woo stood up so fast her chair fell backward. 3 days? They're giving us 3 days to prepare them for a complete upheaval of their lives? "There's more," Subin said quietly. "You won't be going with them. The consortium wants to study how the Vorathians adapt without you. They think the bond needs to be broken." The word hit Ji-woo like a physical blow. Broken. As if the trust and affection between her and the Vorathians was something damaged that needed fixing. As if the protective ring that had formed around her was a problem to be solved, rather than a miracle to be cherished. "I need to see them," Ji-woo said. "Ji-woo, maybe you should wait," Taeyang began. "I need to see them now." She went to Habitat 7, entering without her usual meal, without preparation. The Vorathians noticed immediately that something was wrong. Guardian approached, making his greeting chirp, but it was questioning, concerned. He could read her emotions in her scent, her posture, her face. Ji-woo sat down in the center of the habitat. All 12 Vorathians gathered around her. Guardian, Shadow, and Bright positioned themselves closest, with the others forming their protective outer ring. They knew the pattern so well now that they took their positions without thinking. "I'm sorry," Ji-woo said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. They're taking you away. They say this habitat is too small, that you need more space, that you need to be with your own kind. And maybe they're right. Maybe I've been selfish, keeping you here, making you part of my world instead of helping you belong to yours." Guardian made a low sound. Not quite a growl, more like a question. He moved closer, and did something he had never done before. He carefully, gently, placed his massive head in her lap, the same way she had seen Earth dogs do with their beloved humans. Ji-woo buried her fingers in his fur, feeling the warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Shadow approached from her left and pressed his whole body against her side. Bright came from the right and rested her head on Jiwoo's shoulder. The 9 others moved closer, forming a tighter circle, surrounding her with warmth and presence. They stayed like that for over an hour. Jiwoo cried, and the Vorathians seemed to understand. They made soft sounds, comforting sounds, and stayed close. When she finally stood to leave, Guardian followed her to the door and touched his nose to her hand in their private gesture of promise and trust. Jiwoo spent the next 2 days in a blur of documentation. If she could not go with the Vorathians, she would at least provide Meridian Prime with everything they needed to understand them. She wrote detailed profiles of each individual, their personalities, their preferences, their relationships with each other. She documented the meaning of every gesture, every sound, every behavior pattern she had observed. Taeyang and Subin helped, both of them working late into the station's night cycle. Vixthar contributed observations from his monitoring. Even Wispel, whose species rarely engaged with individual relationships, provided insights about the pack's emotional dynamics. On the final day before transport, Kasthol summoned Jiwoo to his office. She went prepared to argue, to fight, to beg if necessary. But the director's expression stopped her. "You should know," Kasthol said without preamble, "that the Vorathians have refused to eat since you told them goodbye." Jiwoo felt her heart stop. "What?" Guardian attempted to lead the pack out of the habitat yesterday when food was delivered. Shadow has been throwing his collected objects at the observation windows. Bright has been making distress calls continuously for 6 hours. The transport team arrived this morning to begin preparation, and all 12 Vorathians formed a defensive ring around the spot where you usually sit. They will not allow anyone to approach. "Let me go to them," Jiwoo said, immediately. "If you do, you will only make the separation harder. I don't care. They're scared and confused. They think I've abandoned them." Kasthol was silent for a moment. Then he said, "The transport team attempted to use mild sedatives to calm the Vorathians. Guardian attacked the delivery mechanism. He's never shown aggression toward station equipment before. The team leader says they can force the transport using stronger sedatives and containment fields, but it would traumatize them," Jiwoo finished. "It would break their trust in everyone, not just me." "Yes." Kasthal's tail swished behind him in agitation. "I have been a researcher for 30 years. I have observed countless species. I have always maintained proper distance, proper objectivity. But watching those Vorathians wait for you, watching them refuse to eat or cooperate, watching Guardian protect an empty space where you used to sit." He paused. "I am beginning to understand that some bonds cannot be broken without causing harm greater than any benefit the breaking might bring." "What are you saying, Director?" "I am saying that I have contacted the consortium. I have told them that forcing this separation would constitute animal cruelty. I have submitted a formal protest along with all of our research data showing the depth and importance of the human-Vorathian bond. And I have been overruled. The transport will proceed at 1,400 hours today, with or without Vorathian cooperation." Jiwoo looked at the chronometer on the wall. It was 1,100 hours. 3 hours until they would sedate her pack, load them into transport containers, and ship them away. "I'm going to them," she said. "I expected nothing less," Kasthal replied. "I will delay the transport team as long as I can." Jiwoo ran through the corridors of Theta 7, her heart pounding. She entered Habitat 7 without stopping at the observation room, without collecting a meal, without any of her usual preparation. The Vorathians were waiting. All 12 of them stood in their protective formation around the empty space where she usually sat. When the door opened and Jiwoo entered, Guardian's head whipped toward her. He made a sound she had never heard before, part relief and part anguish. She walked to the center of the formation and sat down. Immediately, the Vorathians surrounded her, pressing close, touching her, making sounds of distress and comfort and need. Guardian lay down beside her, his body trembling. Shadow pushed his head under her hand, seeking contact. Bright made soft whining sounds and would not stop touching Jiwoo with her nose, as if confirming she was real. I know, Jiwoo said, her voice thick with tears. I know you're scared. I know you don't understand. They want to take you somewhere new, somewhere bigger, where you can run and hunt and be with your own kind. They think it's better for you. Guardian made a low, rumbling sound. Negative. Refusing. The other Vorathians echoed it. A chorus of denial. But I don't want to lose you either, Jiwoo continued. You're my pack. You chose me. And I chose you. And that means something. That means everything. She sat with them as the minutes ticked by. At 1,330 hours, Casthal's voice came through her communicator. Jiwoo, the transport team is preparing to enter the habitat. You need to exit now. Not yet, Jiwoo replied. They have authorization to use containment fields. If you're in the habitat when they activate them, you could be hurt. Then they'll have to wait. At 1,345 hours, the transport team arrived at the habitat entrance. Jiwoo could see them through the transparent walls, 6 personnel in protective gear, carrying equipment designed to force compliance from dangerous animals. Her Vorathians, her pack, were being treated like violent prisoners. The team leader activated the external communicator. Researcher Jiwoo, you have 5 minutes to exit the habitat. After that, we're coming in. Guardian stood up. So did Shadow and Bright. The 9 others rose as well, forming their protective ring with Jiwoo at the center. But this time, they faced outward toward the habitat entrance, toward the transport team. Their posture was clear. They would defend her against any threat. They're protecting me from you, Jiwoo said into her communicator, her voice carrying to both the transport team and the observation room where Casthal and the others watched. They think you're trying to hurt me. If you force your way in here with containment fields and sedatives, they'll fight you. And some of them will be hurt. Maybe killed. Is that what the consortium wants? To harm the very creatures they claim to want to study? The transport team leader hesitated. Through the communicator, Jiwoo heard heated discussion, multiple voices arguing. Then a new voice came through, one she recognized from holographic meetings. The Vex representative from the consortium. Researcher Jiwoo. This is Administrator Crystalline 7. The transport must proceed. The decision has been made. If you tell to Ark, Alder Formant. This peen. Then unmake it, Jiwoo said. You have years of research showing the importance of this bond. You have data proving that these Vorathians have developed healthy social behaviors despite, or maybe because of, their relationship with me. Separating us serves no purpose except to satisfy some arbitrary idea of what their development should look like. The Vorathians need to be with their own species. Crystalline 7 replied. I am their own species now, Jiwoo said. They chose that. Not me, not you, not anyone. They made the choice to accept me into their pack. Doesn't their choice matter? Silence. Long, stretching silence. Then, from the observation room, Wispel's musical voice spoke. The human is correct. We speak of studying intelligence, of understanding social development, but when intelligent beings make a choice, and we override that choice for our convenience, are we still researchers? Or have we become something else? Vixthar's mandibles clicked. My species does not understand pack bonding the way humans and Vorathians do. But I understand commitment. I understand when a promise has been made. Jiwoo promised these creatures her protection, and they promised her theirs. Breaking such promises has consequences beyond our ability to measure. Taeyang and Subin added their voices. Then other researchers Jiwoo had worked with over the months. A cascade of support, of voices willing to stand up for what the data actually showed instead of what policy dictated. Finally, Casthal spoke. Administrator Crystalline 7, I submit my formal recommendation that the transport be cancelled. The welfare of the subjects must take precedence over institutional convenience. That is the first principle of ethical research. If the consortium overrides this recommendation, I will submit my resignation and make public the reasons why. More silence. Then, the transport is postponed, pending further review. Stand down. The transport team lowered their equipment and retreated from the habitat entrance. Jiwoo felt the tension drain from the Vorathians around her. Guardian made a soft sound of relief and lay back down, pressing against her side. Over the next week, new plans were made. Station engineers designed an expansion to Habitat 7 that would triple its size. The consortium approved funding for 2 more human researchers to be assigned to Theta 7. Minho, a specialist in interspecies communication, and Yuna, an expert in predator cognition. They would work with Jiwoo to expand understanding of human-Vorathian bonding, to see if the phenomenon could be replicated, to learn everything possible from this unprecedented situation. The Vorathians would stay on Theta 7. They would stay with Jiwoo. The pack would remain together. On the day the habitat expansion was completed, Jiwoo entered the larger space with a meal to share. The Vorathians explored their new territory with obvious delight, running and playing in the additional room. But when Jiwoo sat down to eat, all 12 came immediately to form their protective ring. Guardian settled beside her, his massive head resting in her lap, as it often did now. Shadow brought her a gift, a piece of crystalline rock he had found in the new section of the habitat. Bright pressed close, making her contented rumbling sound. Above them, visible through the transparent dome of the expanded habitat, stars wheeled slowly in the endless dark of space. Earth was out there somewhere. The world where humans had first learned to bond with wolves, where the ancient partnership between species had begun. And here, on a station orbiting an alien world, that ancient pattern was repeating itself in a new form. Jiwoo scratched behind Guardian's ears and looked around at her pack. 12 Vorathians who had chosen to trust her. 12 incredible beings who had shown her that the bonds between species could transcend biology, culture, and the vast distances of space. "Thank you," she said softly, not sure if she was talking to the Vorathians, to the friends who had supported her, to the universe that had made this impossible connection possible, or to all of them at once. Guardian's only response was to press closer, warm and solid, and absolutely certain that his place was here, protecting this strange 2-legged member of his pack, while she ate her lunch in peace. And in the observation room above, Minho and Yuna watched their first session, taking notes, already planning their own approaches to building trust with these magnificent creatures. The work would continue, the research would expand, and maybe, just maybe, humanity's ancient gift for bridging the gap between species would help build understanding across the stars. But for now, in this moment, there was just a human and 12 Vorathians sharing a meal, surrounded by a protective ring of trust that nothing in the universe could break.